If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I was just a kid with oversized pads and a dream that felt too big for my own chest, that my life would pivot on the silence in a snowbound motel room, I would have laughed. I didn't come to this league, to this city, to this team looking for anything other than the puck. My life was a series of clean, predictable lines. The crease, the blue line, the red line. It was a geometry I understood. Him, Caleb Hale. He was something else entirely. He was the force that shattered all my angles. My world was small by design. It consisted of the 54 feet from my net to the center line, the sterile white walls of my apartment, and the hum of the refrigerator in the dead of night. Routine was my armor. Wake at 5, oatmeal, stretching, practice, video review, a solitary dinner of chicken and broccoli, sleep, repeat. It was a monk's existence, a quiet devotion to a violent sport. I found comfort in the predictability, in the knowledge that each day would be a near-perfect replica of the one before. It kept the noise out, the noise of loneliness, of wondering if this was all there was. I was the rookie goalie, the new blood, the question mark on the roster. And I was quiet. Too quiet, some of the guys said. They mistook my introspection for arrogance, my anxiety for aloofness. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between the person I was in my head and the stoic, unreadable figure I presented in the locker room. So I didn't try. I just watched. And mostly I watched him. Caleb Hale was the team captain. He was our anchor, our North Star. He moved with an economy of motion that bordered on brutalist poetry. Every stride, every check, every pass was precise, deliberate, and final. He was a defenseman carved from granite and fury, with a reputation that preceded him into every rink in the league. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the locker room fell silent. His voice was low, gravelly, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very architecture of the building. From my lonely perch in the crease, I had the best view in the house. I saw the way he commanded the ice, a general surveying his battlefield. I saw the unyielding set of his jaw, the focus in his eyes that could burn holes through the plexiglass. To the rest of the world, he was confidence personified, an unbreachable fortress. He was everything I wasn't. Loud in his silence, assured in his movements, present. My observation of him was a secret, a private study. I noticed things I was sure no one else did. The way he taped the blade of his stick, an obsessive, rhythmic ritual. The small, almost imperceptible nod he gave the equipment manager every single morning. The faint white scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a ghost of some long-ago battle. These details were my currency, hoarded in the vault of my mind. They made him feel, if not closer, then at least more real. A collection of fragments that I tried to assemble into a person. The distance between us was more than just the length of the ice. It was a chasm. He was the captain, a 10-year veteran. I was the rookie, clinging to my spot on the roster by a thread. He was the center of the team's universe, and I was a satellite in a decaying orbit. We rarely spoke. A clipped, "Good work, kid," from him after a solid practice was enough to sustain me for a week. I'd replay those 3 words in my head, dissecting the tone, searching for a meaning that wasn't there. It was pathetic, I knew, but it was all I had. My feelings for him were a quiet, persistent ache, a low-grade fever I couldn't shake. It wasn't just admiration for his skill, though there was plenty of that. It was something deeper, something that terrified me. It was the way the arena lights caught the silver in his hair, at the temples. The way his laugh, on the rare occasion it broke free, was a startlingly warm sound. It was a longing for a connection I felt utterly incapable of forging, so I kept it locked away, another secret in a life built on them. He was a fixed point in the sky, and I was just an observer, charting his course from an impossible distance. The routine, my beautiful sacred routine, was shattered by the weather. A freak late-season blizzard in the middle of a road trip through the mountains. It started as a whisper of snow during the second period and became a howling, white-out monster by the time the game ended. The world beyond the arena walls had simply ceased to exist, erased by a fury of wind and ice. Our team bus, a lumbering beast of comfort and technology, was rendered useless. It crawled for an hour down a highway that was more of a suggestion than a road before grinding to a halt. Stranded, the decision was made to backtrack to the last town we'd passed, a tiny speck on the map with one blinking traffic light and apparently one motel. The Starlight Inn. The name felt like a cruel joke under the starless, violent sky. The place was a relic from another era. A long, low building with a neon sign that flickered pathetically against the storm. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. The concierge, a man who looked as old as the wood-paneled walls, informed our coach that he had exactly 8 rooms left for a roster of 23 players plus staff. I watched from the back of the crowded lobby as the coach started pairing guys up, tripling and quadrupling them in rooms. My anxiety began its familiar climb, a knot tightening in my stomach. I hated disruptions. I hated the unexpected. I just wanted my own space, my own silence. I scanned the room, my eyes instinctively searching for Caleb. He was standing near the door, arms crossed, staring out at the swirling snow, a portrait of stoic calm amidst the low-level chaos. Then I heard my name. Liam. I looked up. The coach was looking at me, then at Caleb. "You're with Hale. Room 7. It's got 2 beds. You're the lucky ones." The words hit me like a slapshot to an unpadded rib. My heart, that frantic, trapped bird, hammered against my sternum. Me and Caleb in one room for a whole night. The carefully constructed walls of my solitary world crumbled into dust. This wasn't just a disruption. This was a cataclysm. Caleb turned his head, his gaze meeting mine across the room. There was no discernible expression on his face. He just gave a single, curt nod, then turned to grab a key from the concierge. I felt my legs move, carrying me forward as if by some external force. My mind was a static-filled void. Forced proximity. The 2 words echoed in my head, a drumbeat of panic and something else. Something I refused to name. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The walk down the hallway to room 7 was the longest of my life. The floral carpet was thin and worn, the air thick with the scent of pine-scented cleaner. Caleb walked a few paces ahead of me, his equipment bag slung over his shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. My own bag felt like it was filled with lead. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping inside without a backward glance. I hesitated on the threshold for a beat, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing pulse, and followed him in. The room was small, smaller than I'd imagined. 2 double beds with faded chenille spreads, a dark wood dresser, a single armchair in the corner. The window looked out onto a wall of white. The storm had swallowed the world. Caleb dropped his bag by the bed farthest from the door and started unzipping it. The sound was unnervingly loud in the small space. "You can take that one," he said, his voice flat. He gestured with his head toward the bed by the window. "Okay," I managed to say. My voice came out as a whisper. I put my bag down and just stood there, feeling like an intruder. This was his space now, too. Our space. The thought was paralyzing. I was used to observing him from a distance, from the safety of my crease, or the other side of the locker room. Being this close felt like standing too near a bonfire. The heat was immense, and I was terrified of getting burned. He moved with his usual efficiency, pulling out his toiletries, a change of clothes. He was a contained storm of quiet activity, while I was frozen in place. My carefully constructed armor of routine had been stripped away, and I was left exposed, raw. I could feel his presence as a physical weight in the room, altering the very density of the air. I forced myself to move, to unpack my own meager bag. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of shared understanding. It was an awkward, brittle thing, filled with everything I couldn't say. I was acutely aware of every sound: the rustle of clothes, the clink of a zipper, the groan of the old building against the wind, and underneath it all, the frantic, terrified thumping of my own heart. He disappeared into the bathroom, and the sound of the shower starting was a brief reprieve. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clenched in my lap. I could see my reflection in the dark television screen across the room. A pale, tense stranger stared back at me. This was it, the ultimate test of my carefully maintained control. A whole night, trapped in a tiny room with the one person who could undo me with a single word, or worse, with his silence. When he came out of the bathroom, a towel slung low on his hips, my breath caught in my throat. Steam billowed out around him. Water dripped from his hair onto his broad shoulders. I'd seen him without a shirt in the locker room 100 times. But this was different. This was private, intimate. The harsh fluorescent light of the locker room was replaced by the soft, warm glow of the single lamp between our beds. It was in that light that I saw the details I could never have seen from across the ice. The intricate lines of a tattoo I never knew he had. A black ink compass rose partially visible on his ribcage. The constellation of small, faded scars that dotted his torso. A roadmap of his career written on his skin. He wasn't a granite statue anymore. He was just a man. A tired, achingly human man. He seemed oblivious to my staring, or perhaps he was just pretending to be. He pulled a t-shirt and sweatpants from his bag and turned his back to me to change. I quickly looked away, my cheeks burning, feeling like a voyeur. My gaze fell on his hands as he rummaged through his bag. They were athlete's hands, strong and capable, but they were also calloused and scarred. The knuckles were swollen, the fingers nicked and cut from 1,000 minor battles on the ice. They were hands that had blocked shots, thrown punches, and lifted trophies. And in that moment, they looked impossibly weary. I showered quickly, the hot water doing little to soothe the tension coiled in my shoulders. When I came out, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, meticulously retaping his ankle. He worked with a focused intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room was quiet again, save for the rip of the athletic tape and the howling of the wind outside. "You always do that yourself?" I asked. The words just fell out of my mouth, surprising me as much as they probably surprised him. He didn't look up. "Trainers do it before a game. This is just for support. Old injury." He finished the wrap and reached for the roll of tape to tear it, but fumbled, the roll slipping from his grasp and tumbling onto the floor between us. We both bent to pick it up at the same time. His hand, warm and rough, brushed against mine as our fingers closed around the plastic roll. It was nothing. A flicker of contact. A fraction of a second. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, short-circuiting my entire nervous system. My breath hitched. Heat flooded my face. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. Panic. Shock. Heat. I looked up and his eyes met mine. For the first time, I was close enough to really see them. They weren't the cold, hard gray I'd always assumed. They were a complex storm of blue and green, and in that moment they held a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Surprise? Confusion? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual unreadable mask. Thanks, he grunted, taking the tape. He turned back to his ankle, his movements suddenly seeming a little too deliberate, a little too precise. I retreated to my own bed, my heart a chaotic drum solo in my ears. My skin still tingled where he had touched me. It was an insignificant moment, an accident. It meant nothing. But my body, my traitorous body, was screaming that it meant everything. I had spent months, years, building a fortress around my feelings for this man, and all it took to breach the walls was the accidental brush of his hand against mine. He finished with his ankle and flexed it a few times before leaning back against his pillows with a sigh. The sound was heavy with an exhaustion that seemed to go deeper than just the game we'd played. He scrubbed a hand over his face, and in that unguarded moment, the captain, the enforcer, the unbreachable fortress, was gone. In his place was just Caleb, and he looked tired. Bone tired. "Damn storm," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Coach is going to run us into the ground tomorrow to make up for it." "Probably," I agreed, my voice still shaky. He looked over at me then. A real look. His gaze was direct, searching. "You played well tonight, Liam. Kept us in it." The compliment, so simple and direct, landed with the force of a physical blow. It was more than the perfunctory good work in the hallway. This was different. This was him, seeing me, acknowledging me. "Thanks," I said, the word feeling inadequate. You made some key blocks in the second. That one-timer, I never even saw the release, just saw you sliding in front of it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's my job." He paused, his expression shifting. "My shoulder's paying for it now, though. The damn thing is screaming." He tried to rotate his right shoulder, and a sharp wince contorted his features. "Is it bad?" I asked, a sudden unfamiliar wave of concern washing over me. "Nah, just a stinger. It'll be fine. Just can't quite reach the nut in the back." And then the world tilted on its axis. He looked at me, a question in his eyes, a vulnerability I had never ever seen from him. He was asking for help. Not ordering, not demanding. Asking. Suddenly, the power dynamic in the room, the one that had existed since the day I joined the team, captain and rookie, veteran and kid, it just dissolved. In that moment, we were just two men, trapped in a room, one of whom was in pain. I know a little about sports massage," I heard myself say. "My college trainer showed me a few things for my hips." It was a half-truth. I'd paid rapt attention, a student of the body's mechanics, another system to understand and master. Caleb hesitated for only a second. "Yeah? Think you could—" He trailed off, looking away, almost embarrassed. "Sure," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Sit on the edge of the bed, facing away from me." He did as I asked, shifting to present his back to me. I moved from my bed to his, my knees sinking into the soft mattress behind him. The space between us was electric. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. My hands trembled slightly as I raised them. This was insane. I was about to put my hands on Caleb Hale. I placed my thumbs on the knotted muscle beside his shoulder blade. His entire body went rigid at my touch. "Just try to relax," I said softly. He let out a slow breath, and I felt some of the tension in his shoulders release. I began to work the knot, pressing firmly, my movements slow and deliberate. His skin was warm, his muscles hard as rock beneath my fingers. I focused on the mechanics of it, on the anatomy, on anything other than the reality of what was happening. my hands on his back, the scent of his soap and his skin filling my senses, the quiet sound of his breathing in the otherwise silent room. Under my hands, I could feel the intricate landscape of his body. The ridges of his spine, the powerful curve of his lats, the tight coils of muscle that came from years of absorbing and delivering violent impact. And beneath it all, the deep, stubborn knot of pain. I was in a position of care, of knowledge. I was the one providing comfort. The thought was staggering. The impenetrable man was, for this moment, vulnerable, and he was trusting me. After a few minutes, he let out a low groan as I hit a particularly tight spot. "Right there," he murmured, his voice thick. I kept working, losing track of time. The only things that existed were the pressure of my hands, the solid warmth of his back, and the sound of the wind raging outside our small sanctuary. The storm inside me began to quiet, replaced by a profound sense of connection that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Eventually, the knot began to soften, to yield under the pressure. I eased up, gently rubbing the area before pulling my hands away. The loss of contact was immediate and sharp, like a sudden chill. "Better?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He rotated his shoulders slowly, a look of surprised relief on his face. "Yeah, a lot better." "Wow. Thanks, Liam." He turned to look at me, his eyes searching my face in the dim light. "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Just paid attention," I said, shrugging, unable to hold his gaze. I retreated to the safety of my own bed, the distance between us feeling both vast and non-existent. He watched me for a long moment. The silence returned, but it had changed. It was no longer brittle and awkward. It was something else. Deeper. Heavier, with unspoken things. The lights in the motel flickered once, twice, then died. We were plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint, ethereal glow of the snow-covered world outside the window. "Great!" Caleb's voice came out of the blackness, a disembodied sound. The darkness was a blanket. It was both comforting and terrifying. It hid our faces, our expressions, but it seemed to amplify everything else. The sound of our breathing, the frantic beat of my heart, the immense, overwhelming presence of him just a few feet away. We sat in that darkness for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the wind. It was a lonely, mournful sound, a reminder of how isolated we were. Trapped. Together. "I've never seen a storm like this," I said, just to break the silence. "Me neither," his voice replied. "Not since I was a kid, anyway. Grew up in a place with real winters. This reminds me of it." He was talking, opening up. The darkness was a confessional. "It's the pressure, you know?" he said suddenly, his voice quiet, thoughtful. "Being captain. Everyone's always looking at you, expecting you to have the answers, to be the strong one. Some days, it's just heavy." My heart ached for him. It was a confession of a vulnerability I had only just glimpsed. The fortress had a crack in it. "I can't imagine," I said, and I meant it. "I feel like I'm going to throw up before every game. I can't imagine having the weight of the whole team on my shoulders." "You hide it well," he said. There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. "You're always so calm, composed, like nothing gets to you." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "It's an act, a well-rehearsed one. Inside, my stomach is full of bees. Always." He was quiet for a moment. "Bees," he repeated softly. "Yeah, I get that." We were two imposters, admitting our secrets to the darkness. The invincible captain and the stoic rookie. Both of us just terrified kids deep down. The confession was bubbling up inside me, a dangerous, unstoppable pressure. The intimacy of the darkness, his own admission of weakness. It gave me a strange, reckless courage. "You know," I started, my voice barely a whisper, "I've watched you for years, even before I got called up. The way you play, the way you lead. I've never seen anything like it. I wanted to be on this team, not just to make the league, but because I wanted to see how you did it, to learn from you." The words hung in the black air between us. It was too much, too honest. I'd crossed a line. I waited for him to laugh, to tell me to shut up, to retreat back into his shell. Instead, there was only the sound of movement, the rustle of sheets, the soft creak of his bed. I realized he was standing up. I could sense him moving through the darkness, a large shape blotting out the faint light from the window. He stopped beside my bed. I could feel his presence, his warmth. My entire body was humming with a terrified, hopeful energy. "Liam," he said, his voice low and right next to me. I couldn't speak. I could only breathe. "Is that all you wanted?" he asked. The question was soft, but it landed with the weight of an anvil. To learn from me? My carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. He knew, or he suspected. This wasn't about hockey anymore. It was about the way I watched him when I thought no one was looking, the way I flinched when he accidentally touched me, the months of silent, secret longing. This was the moment, the precipice. I could lie, retreat into the safety of my shell, and things would go back to the way they were. The vast, safe distance between us would be restored. Or I could jump. I took a breath that felt like breathing for the first time. "No," I whispered to the darkness. "That's not all." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a physical thing, pressing in on me, stealing the air from my lungs. Then I felt the mattress dip beside me. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, so close. I could smell the clean scent of his skin, feel the heat of his body. My heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. His hand found mine in the darkness. His fingers, calloused and warm, intertwined with my own. The touch was no longer accidental. It was deliberate, questioning, an invitation. I squeezed his hand, a silent, desperate answer. He leaned closer. I could feel his breath on my cheek. It was warm and unsteady. He was nervous, too. The thought was a revelation. Caleb Hale was nervous. Because of me. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture was so impossibly gentle it almost broke me. He wasn't the enforcer. He wasn't the captain. He was just Caleb. And he was here. With me. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, hesitant, a question asked in a language I was only just learning. His lips were soft, searching. It was a kiss of shared loneliness, of years of unspoken things finally being given a voice. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. I kissed him back, pouring all my fear and longing and hope into that one simple act. It was a breakthrough, a surrender. In the heart of the storm, in the absolute darkness, I was finally, terrifyingly, found. I woke to the thin gray light of morning filtering through the gap in the curtains. The storm had passed. The world outside was muffled and still, buried under a thick blanket of new snow. For a moment, a blissful, disoriented moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The motel room, the power outage, Caleb. My eyes flew open. I was alone in the bed. I sat up, my heart beginning its frantic, familiar rhythm of anxiety. The other bed was empty. Not just empty, but made. The sheets were pulled taut, the pillow fluffed, as if no one had ever been there. Caleb's bag was gone. A cold dread, colder than the snow outside, seeped into my bones. I scrambled out of bed. My clothes were in a heap on the floor where I'd left them. His were gone. I looked in the bathroom. Empty. The towels were gone. It was like he had been erased. A ghost. Did I dream it? The darkness, the confession, the kiss, his hand in mine. Was it all just a fever dream, a product of my own desperate imagination? No. I could still feel the ghost of his lips on mine, the phantom warmth of his hand cupping my jaw. It had been real. It had to be. A piece of paper on the nightstand caught my eye. It was a page torn from the motel's notepad. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. This was it. The note explaining it was a mistake. The note telling me to forget it ever happened. I reached for it with a trembling hand, my mind already bracing for the impact of the words. They got the bus running. We're leaving in 10. Be in the lobby. That was it. No signature, no mention of last night. Just a cold practical instruction. It was worse than a rejection. It was a dismissal, an erasure. Last night hadn't been a dream. It had been a footnote, something to be ignored and forgotten as quickly as possible. The intimacy we had shared was already being buried under the snow, just like the rest of the world. My anxiety, the familiar beast, began to spiral. My stomach wasn't full of bees anymore. It was a black hole of self-recrimination. I had misread everything. His vulnerability was just a moment of weakness, and I had taken advantage of it. I had pushed, I had confessed, I had ruined everything. I wasn't just the quiet rookie anymore. I was the freak who had crossed a line with the team captain. My career, the only thing I had, felt like it was dissolving into mist. I dressed in a fog, my movements clumsy and robotic. I packed my bag, my mind replaying every moment from the night before, twisting it, reinterpreting it through the harsh lens of morning after clarity. His hesitation wasn't nervousness, it was reluctance. His kiss wasn't a confession, it was a curiosity, a mistake he already deeply regretted. The walk to the lobby was a green mile. When I entered, most of the team was already there, nursing cups of bad coffee, grumbling about the storm. I saw Caleb standing with the coach and one of the veteran players. He was laughing at something the coach said. Laughing, as if it were just another morning. He glanced up, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before flicking away. No recognition, no emotion, nothing. I was a stranger to him again. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than ever before. The bus ride back to the city was a special kind of torture. Hours of silence, trapped in a confined space with the man who had completely dismantled my world, and then pretended it never happened. He sat near the front. I sat at the back. The entire length of the bus separated us, a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened between us once more. My former solitude, the one I had cultivated and found comfort in, now felt like a punishment. It was a hollow, aching thing, tainted by the memory of what had filled it for a few short hours. It was an absence, his absence. The next few days were a blur of muted agony. We were back in our city, back in our routine, but everything was different. Everything was broken. I went through the motions. Practice, video, gym. But my focus was shattered. My mind was a constant loop of the motel room, of his voice in the dark, of the cold, hard emptiness of his made bed in the morning. I avoided him. It was a coward's move, but it was the only way I could survive. I was the first one on the ice and the last one off. I found reasons to be in the training room when I knew he'd be in the gym. In the locker room, I kept my eyes down, my world shrinking to the few square feet of my stall. I could feel his presence, of course. It was a magnetic pull I had to actively fight against. I felt his eyes on me sometimes, but I never looked up to confirm it. I couldn't bear to see the pity, or worse, the disgust on his face. The silence between us was deafening. It was heavier than the pre-storm silence had ever been. It was an active, malevolent thing, a testament to what I had broken. The other guys on the team didn't seem to notice anything. But how could they? There was nothing to notice. The distance between me and Caleb Hale had simply been restored to its natural state. Only now I knew what it felt like to cross it, and the knowledge was a constant, burning pain. I was back in my armor, but it was cracked and ill-fitting. The solitude I had once cherished now felt like a prison cell of my own making. The quiet of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. It screamed his name in the long, lonely hours of the night. I had tasted connection, real connection, for the first time in my life, and now I was starving. 3 days, 72 hours of agonizing, suffocating silence. I was starting to believe this was my new reality. I had to accept it. I had to forget him, forget that night, and go back to being the person I was before. The quiet goalie, the solitary man. It was the only way to move forward. I had just finished my sad dinner of chicken and broccoli and was rinsing the plate when there was a knock on my apartment door. My blood ran cold. I never had visitors. Ever. My apartment was my sanctuary, my fortress. No one from the team even knew exactly where I lived. The knock came again, firmer this time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wiped my damp hands on my pants and walked to the door, my mind racing. Who could it possibly be? I peered through the peephole, and the world stopped turning. It was him. Caleb, standing in the hallway of my building. He was dressed in jeans and a plain gray hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets. He wasn't the captain. He was just a man standing outside my door, and he looked uncertain, lost. The unbreachable fortress looked like he was about to crumble. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to just stand there in the silence until he went away. It would be safer, easier. But the memory of his hand in mine, of his voice in the dark, wouldn't let me. I took a shaky breath and opened the door. He looked up, and his eyes, that stormy mix of blue and green, were filled with a raw vulnerability that struck me to my core. He looked as wrecked as I felt. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, rough. "Hey," I replied, my own voice barely audible. We stood there for a long, awkward moment, the silence of the hallway stretching between us. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me. Can I come in?" he asked. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into my small, sterile living room and stood in the center of it, looking around as if he'd entered a foreign country. He looked out of place, too large and vibrant for my muted gray world. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to face me. The words were rushed, torn from him. "Liam, I'm so sorry." "For what?" I asked, though I knew. "For how I acted, in the morning, on the bus, this whole week." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I was a coward. I panicked. My carefully constructed defenses began to crack. He wasn't here to finalize the rejection. He was here to apologize. "I woke up," he continued, his voice low and intense, "and the sun was coming up, and everything was real. And it scared the hell out of me. What happened between us? It wasn't a mistake. It was the realest thing that's happened to me in a long time. And that terrified me. I didn't know what to do, what to say. So I did what I always do. I put the wall back up. I ran. He took a step closer to me. These last 3 days, they've been hell. The silence. Trying to pretend that I didn't feel you next to me in the dark. That I can't still feel your hand in mine. I can't do it, Liam. I don't want to go back to how things were before. Every word he spoke was a balm on my frayed nerves, a suture on my wounded heart. The fear, the doubt, the self-recrimination that had been poisoning me for days began to recede. He was scared too. He was just as lost in this new territory as I was. I thought I imagined it, I confessed, my voice breaking. I thought I'd crossed a line, and you hated me for it. Hated you? He let out a humorless laugh. He took another step, closing the distance between us. He was so close now, I could see the flecks of green in his eyes. Liam, I haven't been able to think about anything else. You, that room, everything. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently cupped my cheek, just as he had in the darkness. This time, I could see the raw emotion on his face. The fear, yes, but underneath it, something else, something deep and hopeful and real. This is new for me, he whispered. All of it. I don't know the rules here. I just know that I don't want that silence between us ever again. Me neither, I breathed, leaning into his touch. He searched my eyes, a silent question passing between us. Then he leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't hesitant or questioning. It was a confirmation, a statement. It was full of the apology he couldn't fully articulate and the relief of a man who had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. I melted into him, my hands coming up to grip his hoodie, anchoring myself to him. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine. I don't want to hide, he said, his voice firm, but I don't know how to do this. We can figure it out, I said, a wave of impossible bravery washing over me. Together. He pulled back slightly, a small, genuine smile, finally reaching his eyes. It transformed his entire face, chasing away the shadows. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a single small key on a plain metal ring. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. What's this? I asked, looking down at the cool metal. It's the key to my place, he said, his gaze steady and serious. Just in case you ever need somewhere to go, or in case I'm an idiot again and you need to come over and knock some sense into me, in case of silence. It was more than a key. It was a promise, an anchor, a tangible act of commitment that spoke louder than any grand declaration could. It was him, handing me a piece of his life, inviting me into his space. It was the most romantic gesture I could possibly imagine. I curled my hand tightly around the key, the metal edges digging into my palm. Okay, I whispered. Okay, he repeated, his smile widening. He leaned in and kissed me one more time, soft and sure. A new beginning. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. The world didn't explode. The team didn't find out and cast us out. The universe continued to spin on its axis, but my personal universe had been irrevocably, wonderfully recentered. It started small, a shared look across the locker room that no one else would understand. A brief touch of his hand on the small of my back as we passed in the hallway. We were building a new language, a secret dialect spoken in glances and gestures. The fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet, humming joy. Then came the mornings. The first time I used the key, my hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit it in the lock. I let myself into his apartment before a morning practice. It was so different from mine. Warm woods, comfortable, slightly worn furniture. It smelled like coffee and him. I found him in the kitchen, shirtless in sweatpants, making coffee. He turned when he heard me, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for me to be standing in his kitchen at dawn. He poured a second mug without asking and slid it across the counter to me. We drank our coffee in comfortable silence, the morning light streaming through the window. There was no anxiety, no need to fill the space with words, just a shared, peaceful existence. It was the most domestic, most normal, most extraordinary moment of my life. We started sharing meals. Not just the mandated team dinners, but quiet meals at his place or mine. We learned about each other in fragments. He hated mushrooms. I was a surprisingly good cook. He had a sister in Oregon he talked to every Sunday. I had a fear of thunderstorms that I'd never admitted to anyone. We were slowly, carefully, revealing the people we were behind the uniforms and the expectations. One night, after a tough loss, we were lying on his couch, the television playing some mindless show on mute. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. He was quiet, his arm draped around my shoulders. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was a rhythm that grounded me, a sound that meant safety. I fell asleep there, and when I woke up, he had carried me to his bed. He was asleep beside me, one arm thrown protectively over my waist. I lay there, in the darkness, watching him breathe, and the anxiety that had been my constant companion for so many years was just gone. In its place was a profound sense of peace. This wasn't the charged, terrifying intimacy of the motel room. This was home. This was a quiet, steady love that had snuck up on me and rearranged my soul. I look back on the man I was before that blizzard, and it's like watching a stranger in an old movie. That solitary, anxious boy who lived his life by a set of rigid, self-imposed rules. His world was so small, so colorless. He thought routine was safety, that solitude was strength. He had no idea what he was missing. Caleb wasn't just a person who entered my life. He was a plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption, the storm that forced me out of the safe harbor I had built for myself and into the beautiful, terrifying, unpredictable ocean. He taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. That connection isn't a risk, it's the entire point. He didn't just break down my walls. He helped me realize I didn't need them in the first place. Now, my life is a series of new lines. The line of his smile in the morning. The curve of his back as he sleeps. The invisible, unbreakable thread that connects my heart to his, no matter the distance. The geometry is more complex now, more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. I found more than love with Caleb. I found myself. And it makes me wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever had a moment, a single event or person that completely upended your life for the better? A storm that you thought would destroy you, but ended up showing you a new way to live. I'd love to hear about it, to know that these quiet miracles happen to others too. Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about finding love in the most unexpected of places, please consider subscribing. It means the world